Results are in and there's no surprise. Egypt's president has been re-elected for a second term in what was effectively an empty contest. We ask what this means for the country and the region. I'm Imran Garta and today's newsmaker is Abdel Fattah El-sisi. President Sisi has won a second term in office. Well, we say won, but it wasn't much of a contest and the result was never in doubt. The only other candidate, Musa, had been a Sisi supporter until his name was added to the ballot at the last minute. And Egyptian opposition media has been swirling with rumors that Musa even voted for Sisi rather than himself. These rumors were denied by Musa's team, but they illustrate how many people, both inside and outside the country, see the election as a charade. Does this matter? And what can we expect from Sisi's second term? We'll be discussing all of these questions with a panel of guests in a moment. But first, this report from Christine Pirovalakis.
Autocrats seem to have a way of winning elections. And Egyptian President Abdel Fattah El-sisi has scored a landslide victory. That's after all credible political rivals were kept from the ballot. 4 of them were pressured to quit. A 5th was arrested and sent to prison. And the only challenger, Mustafa Musa, entered the race at the last minute, but was seen as a puppet candidate. With Sisi's re-election for a second term a sure thing, turnout provided the only cliffhanger. Sisi had urged people to come out and vote, and there are reports Egyptians that failed to do so would be fined. State media says preliminary results show Sisi securing 92% of the vote, but only 38% bothered to cast ballots. Last time in the 2014 election, Sisi got almost 97%, and turnout was higher at 47%. Many polling stations remained quiet during the 3-day vote, and officials extended voting by an hour on the last day.
Everyone went to vote knowing that their view was the right one, that they were electing a president for the next stage to complete a successful journey and to continue the project of the past 4 years.
It's the 3rd time Egyptians have gone to the polls after the Arab Spring protests of 2011 forced out long-term leader Hosni Mubarak. At the time, many hoped Egypt had entered a new era of democracy. Instead, it was thrown further into political turmoil. Barely a year after the Muslim Brotherhood's Mohamed Morsi became the country's first democratically elected president in 2012, Egyptians held mass protests against his rule. And in the end, he was overthrown by a military coup led by Sisi. After 4 years in power, Sisi has suppressed free speech and the rights of opponents, activists, and the media. He's also led a security crackdown that's left hundreds dead and tens of thousands imprisoned and awaiting death sentences, including former President Mohamed Morsi. But many Egyptians, as well as the country's Arab and Western allies, consider Sisi key for the region's stability.
We are giving our vote to the president so that God will bless him and he will carry us forward, and so that we won't see dark days like other countries.
He's been waging a war against terrorism on the Sinai Peninsula and has been credited with reviving the economy through a series of harsh austerity reforms. But that has pushed millions of families to the poverty line. To secure a $12 billion loan from the IMF in 2016, the government was forced to cut energy, water, and food subsidies, as well as increase taxes. That has hiked prices, as did the devaluation of the Egyptian pound. While unemployment has decreased since the Arab Spring, it's still in double digits. Sisi has tried to expand the country's power and gas supply with the addition of new plants and an energy deal with Israel. But he's come under criticism for costly mega projects like the expansion of the Suez Canal. With a large number of Egyptians not turning out for the election, could it be that people are running out of patience with Sisi? Christine Pirovalakis, The Newsmakers.
Well, I'm joined here in the studio by Ahmed Badir. He is an Egyptian-American and the president of United Voices for America, an organization that promotes civic engagement and democracy. From London, I'm joined by analyst Ali Al-Kabani. He was previously the general manager of the Islamic Press Agency And in Cairo is Mustafa Ragab. He's an observer of Egyptian affairs and the founder of the UK Egyptian Association. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Let me start with my studio guest, Ahmed Badir. Is there any credibility in this election?
Obviously, there isn't to outside observers. There were no real candidates running against President Sisi. In fact, the only one other candidate running against him was someone who previously endorsed him and said that he wouldn't debate Sisi because it would be disrespectful and that he adores him. You know, some people are speculating that he himself voted for Sisi. So obviously, any other contenders that even attempted were either arrested or pushed out of the country, and not to mention the tens of thousands of political prisoners, opposition prisoners, are not even allowed to participate in elections. So really, there's no credibility in this election.
Strongly put, Mustafa Ragab. I understand that you participated, you voted. Have you voted in a sham election?
Well, let me tell you something about people standing for the election. I think wise people have realized that this time that Egypt passing by, the suitable person is President Sisi to lead the country at this time, and that is why people didn't stand for the election. Otherwise, people who were just making things for their own agenda and trying to achieve personal gain, they have done what they wanted. But I'm here in Egypt, seen on the ground, the Egyptian people in numbers, ladies and men, young people, all came out in numbers and voted. It was like a festival in Egypt I've seen. Egypt needs the time now in President Sisi to fight terrorism. Egypt will never wake up and never work without doing stability and peace in the country.
Okay, that's an interesting point. Okay, certainly. And we're going to explore that in a moment. We're going to explore, in a few minutes, we're going to explore whether him being the stability candidate has actually worked, whether Egypt is safer and there isn't terrorism and so forth. We're going to get to that in a moment. Let me bring in Ali Al-Kabani, because, Ali, we hear from Mustafa Ragab that it was like a festival. Young people, women, old people, all there in support of President Sisi. You two have disagreed on this program before. Is that convincing to you, Ali?
It was actually a real circus, because the time of election is time to judge the candidates and put them into account, not to go and dance and sing and make this a joke in front of the whole world. And your guest from Cairo said that there was no other candidates because everybody thought that Sisi is the right man for the time being. He had been in charge for 5 years, 5 disastrous years, and the Egyptians are fed up from him. And the low turnout in this election proves that people are fed up from Sisi and his regime, and they want to get rid of him. And on top of it, he said there are no other candidates. There was Colonel Khonsowa, there was General Ahmed Shafiq, there was General Sami Anan, and Sisi himself said that he will never allow them to compete in this election. Who is he to allow or disallow others? He considered them and accused them of being corrupt. One of them was the ex-chief of staff of the Egyptian army. Ahmed Shafiq was ex-prime minister and general in the air forces, and Khonsowa was a colonel in the Egyptian army. So are all those corrupt people, and only Sisi is not corrupt? I don't accept or agree with any of the military people, but they have the right to put themselves as candidates.
Okay, fair enough. So let's ask Mustafa Ragab. Mustafa Ragab, you're laughing there, right? You say, listen, everybody else stepped aside because they all believe that Sisi is the right man, so this election was just a formality. Ali Al-Kabani has listed a whole bunch of people who wanted to run but were disqualified. That's what Sisi did. That's why this election's an entire joke, isn't it?
Not only disqualified, put in jail.
I know what Mr. Kabani is going to say, but let me tell you something. I'm really surprised and shocked with the credibility that Mr. Kabani giving to those names, because in one time they say those people should never stand for the election, but when they didn't, he's really speaking very highly about them. So make up your mind. Do you want people from the army to rule, or you don't want people from the army to rule?
I have no respect of any of them.
You really don't know. You don't know what you want, do you? You just come in the program and put your own agenda.
I have no respect of any of them, but they have got the right to put their names as candidates.
The Egyptian people have said what they want to say. So me and you now, observers, we have just to wait and see the count for the election, and then we have to accept it, and we have to respect it, and we have to work together to rebuild the country. It's no good that we keep putting our own personal agenda on Egyptian people.
Okay, I mean, I think for everybody, Egypt is a personal agenda, especially since 2011. Let me bring it back to Ahmed Badir here, to the point that was made earlier. Sisi is seen as a stability candidate. If there's no Sisi, the argument goes, Egypt will become Libya, Egypt will become Syria. Does that check out? Has the evidence shown that even though he might be a little dictatorial, even though he might not be the greatest Jeffersonian Democrat on the planet, you need him to keep the country safe?
He hasn't kept the country safe. He hasn't improved the economy. He has failed in all levels. And if you look at the Sinai, it's almost like a Libya or Syria, the amount of violence that's happening there. ISIS did not exist when Morsi was around. Now ISIS is flourishing in the Sinai itself. He is failing on all levels. He's failing to deliver on his promises. People look at the value of the Egyptian pound now. The economy is in the tanks. This person was promised so much, and at the beginning running on defeating militancy and Islamist and terrorism, has failed to even do that. So what has President Sisi brought except less democracy, a horrible economy, and a lack of security? He's failing, and to answer earlier, before he was blaming everything on the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamists, and rejecting them being part of the political process, but now people who are actually from the military. I mean, he's becoming so authoritarian that he's rejecting anyone other than him. Anyone from the Mubarak regime, anyone from the military. He thinks he's the only one, God's gift to Egypt, and he's not going anywhere. And now his own people around him, he's created this cult-like system around him. Now they want him to run for a third, fourth, and fifth term, and eventually he's going to become like the president or the leader of North Korea. That he's the only one that can rule Egypt for life.
Mustafa Ragab, tell me why you disagree.
Well, I hope we can reach the standard of North Korea. I really praise that. I appreciate that.
Well, there you go. This is how
I will raise my
absurd
hat
this
for them.
I'm going to take that as sarcasm, but I'll let you answer. I'm going to take that as sarcasm, because otherwise we've lost all credibility. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, let me tell you. President Sisi, all the things that has been said about him now from our colleague in America is not true. The stability in Egypt, at least they have stopped the terrorists at the borders of Egypt, people sacrificing their lives every day. The terrorists have not managed to get inside Egypt. Of course, we fear that day that Egypt become like Syria or Libya or Yemen or Iraq. But we are grateful for President Sisi and our army for keeping Egypt as it is now. Without that, there would be no education, no economy,
but Mr. Ragab,
no stability.
300 people killed in a mosque, church bombings, Daesh actually controlling land in Sinai. If Morsi was in charge and this was happening, you would clearly say, listen, man, you're not keeping the country safe. Terrorists are running amok. How is it possible that Egypt can be safe when these things are happening? Tell me.
No, my friend, Morsi have blunted the terrorism in Sinai. There was a big agenda there in Sinai. We started the problem with Morsi's time. If you remember, the officers getting killed in Ramadan when they breaking the fast, that was in Morsi's time. We have suffered hell in Morsi's time. Now at least we are in a bit of control, and we are controlling the Sinai. The army is cleaning Sinai. The army is clearing the Sinai from terrorism. The border with Libya, the border with Sudan, we are facing a huge challenge. Should people take that lightly and think there is no problem?
Let me
they
extend,
really don't live with the reality.
Certainly. Okay, so you talk about the reality and living with the reality. Let me then ask you, does Egypt need a phase of authoritarianism and less democracy in order to keep things stable, in order to fight terrorism, and in order to grow the economy? Is that what it needs?
If you want to ask me my personal opinion, honestly, the government is very soft. They should be a lot harder, and much harder. And this is what every leader in the world did. When it comes to the security of the country, they said, don't talk to me about human rights. This is what the British Prime Minister said. This is what the German Prime Minister said. This is what the French Prime Minister said.
This is a lie.
When it comes to the
This is a
security
blatant
and the
lie.
safety of the country, don't talk to me. I think our government is very soft. They should make an example of everyone, every traitor, everybody who's trying to destroy this country, everybody who's doing things against this country. He should be punished very hard to be an example.
Let's get a response from Ali Al-Kabani.
That's my personal opinion.
What you've got, we have Mustafa Ragab saying it's a personal opinion, but in many ways it reflects what a lot of Egyptians do believe, right? Those who support Sisi. Do you accept that, Ali?
No, this is propaganda rhetoric, and the whole countries of the world are living in peace, and Sisi cannot control the terrorist groups in Sinai. And 1 month ago, we heard about a military campaign by air forces, navy, and land forces to clear Sinai within weeks. Now, weeks have passed, and we didn't hear any outcome of this campaign. The question now is Sisi won the second term, and I would say that he will win a third and fourth term. The question now is when the parliament will change the constitution to allow him to stay longer. So it is a joke. There is no democracy in Egypt. It's a continuation of the corrupt regime of Mubarak and the military rule since July 1952. Nothing changed.
I mean, what is your evidence of the corruption?
The Blessed Revolution.
What is your evidence of this corruption? What is your evidence?
The evidence is giving away two islands. The evidence is giving away two islands.
Egypt is a state of corruption.
Okay.
Is it
so Ali Al-Kabani says, hold on.
What
so Ali Al-Kabani says
it's a political issue.
Okay, we're all talking at the same time. Gentlemen, Ali Al-Kabani says it's a state of corruption, right? We don't have time to go into specifics here. But now, okay, you disagree. Ali Al-Kabani says it's corruption. Mustafa Ragab says, I need evidence that there's corruption. Ahmed Badir, you spoke about the islands and the Saudis.
Issue. It's not corruption.
Which allows me, hold on for a second, right? It allows me to bring up the geopolitics, because we've got about 3 minutes left, so I want to get a geopolitical opinion from all three of you, right? Ahmed, let me start with you. Egypt under Sisi, in the Saudi camp, in the UAE camp, in terms of the Qatar dispute and geopolitically in the region. And on top of all of that, Sisi is Washington's man. How do you feel about that?
He shouldn't be Washington's man. Washington continues to see Egypt in the lens of protecting Israel. And so whoever does the best job to protect Israel's interests in the region is the man that Washington thinks can bring stability. And right now, even the Benjamin Netanyahu and the leadership in Tel Aviv think that Sisi is the best president ever to come to Egypt, that he's God's gift. They've been quoted as saying that. So, and he's working closely with the Israelis. So in that sight, they see him as a great person. But for the Egyptians themselves and for the region, he's brought less credibility for Egypt. They're no longer an honest broker. They don't have the leverage over the Palestinians. They're no longer respected as as an Egyptian superpower. That has now shifted to Saudi Arabia and to some of the other small countries. The UAE now has more leverage and more pull in the region. And when you talk about corruption, a lot of the money that came, I mean, he was able to be propped up by the billions of dollars given to him by the Saudis and the Emiratis, which most of that money did not go to help any programs, and most of that went to the leadership in the military. The problem with Egypt is it continues to be led by military rule, which needs to come to an end at some point.
Okay. Ali Al-Kabani, I'm going to give you the final word on this. But first, Mustafa Ragab, maybe Mustafa Ragab will rile you up a little bit with this answer, perhaps. Mustafa Ragab, geopolitically, aligning with the Israelis, aligning with the Saudis, aligning with the Emiratis, and having the protective umbrella of Washington as Hosni Mubarak had it over all those years. Is that the way to go for Egypt in the region and geopolitically?
Right. Politically, I can tell you that my colleagues, they have no proof for any statement they're saying. And I'm telling you that Sisi is not anybody's man, not America, not Saudi Arabia. And the proof for that, that America will be very friendly with Sisi today, and they'll be very angry with him tomorrow, and then they become friendly again with him, and the same with Saudi Arabia. That proves to me that Sisi is not anybody's man. He does what is good for the country. And when it suits them, they are friends. When it doesn't suit them, they are enemies. That is my first point. My second point is we have to respect the Egyptian Egyptian people wishes. If they vote for Sisi, that's it. Everybody should go back home.
But you already accepted that there weren't any other candidates. But again, you've already accepted there weren't really any other candidates and that the election wasn't a proper election. So now you're saying accept the wishes of the Egyptian people, but you're also saying that the election wasn't quite the most democratic election. You've admitted to that.
No, it was. And what I said to you, I said that people saw that Sisi is the suitable man for the time, and that's why people didn't stand for the election. And what we look forward for now, the next term, that people will come forward, people who have the credibility and have the ability and have the everything that it takes to become a president can come and stand and we'll have a good election next term.
Okay, I want to get a response from Ali Al-Kabani. I'm so sorry, you don't have much time, less than a minute.
Going to say.
Ali Al-Kabani, you have less than a minute. Place Sisi's Egypt in context in the region in terms of the broader politics.
Mr. Ragab is living in a cocoa land. Sisi made Egypt a client state to the Americans, and the Americans would not pay $1.3 billion annually in military aid to Sisi if he is not a client to the Americans. Also, he made Egypt a follower, not a leader in the Middle East, and he is following now the sheikhs of Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. The Israelis said about Mubarak, he is a strategic treasure, and now Sisi made a better strategic treasure for the Israelis. Egypt now have lost all credibility, and its image in the whole world have been damaged by this non-democratic military rule. And one day, I hope very soon, the Egyptian people will start the revolution again, and they will continue the 25th of January.
And you're going to lead this revolution, Mr. Kabani.
Regime once and for all.
Okay, gentlemen.
No, I'm not going to lead it. The Egyptian people will.
Okay, we've had this conversation before.
I don't live in Egypt.
Yeah, we've had this conversation before. But gentlemen, we're out of time. It's been a pleasure having you all on the program. Let's see what Sisi does in his second term. Ali Al-Kabani, Mustafa Ragab and Ahmed Badir.
Yes.
I thank you all for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
That is the issue.
Still ahead on the Newsmakers, Kim and Xi's surprise summit in Beijing. What does it reveal about China-North Korea relations? And India's data debate, why the Prime Minister's own app is under scrutiny. A mystery train pulled into Beijing this week amid tight security and a flurry of rumors about whom it might be carrying. But it didn't remain a mystery for very long. On board was North Korean leader Kim Jong-un on his first known international visit since he took power in 2011. China has traditionally been North Korea's closest ally, but ties have been strained lately with China's backing of tough UN sanctions. So what should we make of this surprise summit just a couple of months before Kim is due to meet US President Donald Trump? Shoaib Hassan reports.
A secret visitor to Beijing and the start of an unexpected series of events. North Korea's leader held talks with China's President Xi Jinping that were unscheduled and only revealed when they were over. But Kim Jong-un's first international visit ended with some seemingly positive news. A commitment by the North Korean ruler to denuclearize the Korean peninsula.
China always sticks to the goal of realizing denuclearization on a peninsula and maintaining peace and stability on a peninsula, and upholds using political consultations to properly resolve the peninsula issue.
North Korean state media also praised the meeting.
Our first meeting came at an important time, when the socialist cause of the peoples of the two countries has entered the phase of new development.
These talks appear especially significant, given Kim and US President Donald Trump are due to meet later this year. North Korea's nuclear program remains the main dispute between Pyongyang and Washington, but that could change if Kim sticks to his commitment. That could be why Trump appeared happy with the meeting. He tweeted, "It went very well and Kim looks forward to his meeting with me," adding that, in the meantime, sanctions on North Korea would remain in place. That's as North and South Korean officials announced the first peace talks between the two sides in nearly a decade would be held at the end of April.
So, this is the peace. Korean and New Zealand. Thank you very much for your commitment.
So does Kim Jong-un's trip to Beijing mean Pyongyang is really opening up to the world? And just how influential is China in encouraging this change? Shoaib Hassan, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now from Medford, Massachusetts in the U.S. is Sung-Yoon Lee. He's a professor of Korean Studies at Tufts University. He's also appeared as an expert witness at a congressional hearing on North Korea policy. In Washington, D.C., we have Will Satran. He's a research associate and program officer at the Institute for China-America Studies. And completing our panel is Victor Gao in Beijing. He's the director of the China National Association of International Studies. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Will Satran, good to have you on the program. I understand it's the first time you're on the Newsmakers. Tell me what this means, this meeting between Kim and Xi. What does it tell you?
Well, first of all, it tells me that the Chinese-North Korean alliance is stronger than we suspected. It had been declining pretty precipitously for a number of years. There were a lot of speculations that these relations had gone very sour. And it was clear that it was important both to Pyongyang and to Beijing to show the world that those ties are much stronger than people had speculated that they were. I saw this meeting as a big loss for the United States. Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the White House press secretary, admitted that the White House was not notified until after the fact. And the illusion that the Trump administration has tried to paint that they are in charge, that they are driving the narrative and the peace process on the Korean Peninsula, I think was pretty decisively shattered.
Okay, so Professor Lee, is this a sidelining of the Americans as the Chinese re-inject themselves into this process?
It's simply the restoration of China to its proper role in the region, which is really the center, the middle kingdom running the show. And the fact that it took Kim Jong-un 6 years to visit Beijing is rather meaningless. It took his father, Kim Jong-il, also 6 years for his first visit to Beijing to happen, into his rule, that is. Why? Because the timing is now optimal for a visit to China. After having established its credibility last year with 3 ICBM tests and the most powerful nuclear test to date for North Korea, Kim has reset the table and is now well poised to beckon, to summon the world's biggest powers to come to Pyongyang or to greet him and treat him as a global statesman. So nothing's really changed in terms of the basic dynamics in the region, with North Korea calling the shots through a strategy of calculated provocations and then de-escalation.
Okay, so Victor Gao, what we're hearing from Sung-Yoon Lee is that actually it's not China calling the shots, it's not anybody else dictating the tempo here, it's actually the North Koreans who are doing this in a very calculated way, and we've seen this happen before. Is that how you see it?
No, I think, first of all, we need to look at the positive development on the Korean Peninsula. ROK and DPRK are now working closer to each other, and there is the announced, proposed meeting between between DPRK leader and President Donald Trump of the United States. But what happened in Beijing is very significant. Why? Because for about 2 years, China has consistently called for dialogue and negotiation and opposed any threat of war. And China also insisted that China will not tolerate any war on its doorstep. I think it's absolutely important to note that China has made the right decision, has made the right proposal, and parties involved are now more or less moving in the same direction that China charted. That is that we are all moving towards dialogue and peace. We do not want to find ourselves in a situation where everyone wants to take credit. If peace prevails, everyone can get a credit.
Okay, let's find out from Will if he believes that we are moving towards more peace here. I mean, is the prospect of a nuclear confrontation or any other confrontation less of a possibility now that the Chinese are meeting with Kim Jong-un in Beijing and they're talking?
I don't know if it's less of a possibility. I think it's been a bad option the entire way. If you remember a couple months ago when Steve Bannon was fired from the White House, right before his ouster, he was quoted as having said, people who talk about a military strike on North Korea, forget about it. They've got us. It's not an option. So I don't think the situation has changed all that much. Quite frankly, a lot of what happens is going to be up to North Korea. I think a lot remains to be seen about how sincere they are about these talks. They could just be stalling. They could just be buying time to solidify their nuclear program behind the scenes, even if they freeze testing of the missiles and of the nuclear weapons themselves.
Okay, so to the point of sincerity, Sung-Young Lee, let me ask you about what you think about what Kim Jong-un had said. This was according to Xinhua, quoted according to Xinhua, saying, "It is our consistent stand to be committed to denuclearization on the peninsula in accordance with the will of the late President Kim Il-sung, his grandfather, and late General Secretary Kim Jong-il, his father." Do you believe him?
I absolutely believe him, and that is denuclearization of the Korean peninsula, the great resolve of his father and grandfather. That means, in North Korean parlance, dislodging the U.S. extended nuclear deterrence from the region, meaning abrogation of the U.S. ROK alliance and the withdrawal of U.S. troops from South Korea, and the abrogation of the U.S.-Japan alliance, and the withdrawal, the eviction of all U.S. troops from Japan as well. That's what denuclearization of the Korean peninsula means. Note how no one says denuclearization of North Korea. It's always the Korean peninsula. There are no nukes in the south.
Right? Very fascinating. Okay, so Victor Gao, what we hear from China a lot of the time is that the Chinese don't want to see North Korea collapse because obviously they don't want a flood of refugees across the border. It would be tremendously destabilizing and so forth. But beyond that, is it a little bit deeper? Do the Chinese not want a collapse of North Korea because that would mean that an entire Korean peninsula under the hegemony of the United States, under the protective umbrella of the United States, as we have the South right now?
No, I think China has no selfish vested interest in the development on the Korean Peninsula. What China stands for is a very noble and a very esteemed position. That is, there should be no war, there should be no military confrontation on the Korean Peninsula, there should be peace and stability prevailing for the benefit of the people in DPRK as well as in ROK, and for the overall benefit of all the countries concerned in this part of the world and beyond. I think this is probably the best and the noblest objective we can think about as far as the Korean situation is concerned. China, given its size and extra importance on the global stage, we are not only thinking about our own national interest, we most likely will think about our own national interest in the overall context of global interest. And on the Korean situation, it's exactly the case in point, because what China has advocated over the past 2 years, the 2 suspensions, for example, for DPRK to suspend its nuclear testing, for the United States and ROK to suspend their joint military exercises, at least worked till now. And hopefully this will be the direction to go for both DPRK on the one hand and ROK and the United States on the other hand.
Professor Lee, let me ask you if you agree with that China stands for a noble, or works from a noble and esteemed position. That's what Victor Gao said. Do you believe him?
Well, it's been a constant message over the past 25 years of the North Korean nuclear saga. China always counsels patience, for God's sake, no war. Let's return to dialogue and maintain the peace in the region. In truth, of course, there has been de facto peace in the Korean Peninsula since the end of the Korean War in 1953, whereas if you look at the 65 or so year period leading up to the outbreak of the war in 1950, there are 4 major wars in and around the Korean Peninsula. If I were a space alien observing the situation, I would really think that Kim Jong-un is, as Trump once called him, a smart cookie. He's doing very well with the cards that he's been dealt. He is able to really negotiate with and prevail over the world's biggest powers. That's quite an achievement.
Right. Will Satran, beyond the weight and the hairstyles and the funny memes and so on and so forth, a lot of people do say, yes, we underestimate Kim Jong-un, we underestimate North Korea as a rational actor trying to, look out for itself. With that in mind, there's a summit coming up April 27th. If you were called in to counsel South Korea's leadership, if you had to share the room with Moon Jae-in and he said, hey, what should I know about this? What should I keep in mind ahead of this meeting with Kim Jong-un? What would you tell him?
I would tell him absolutely take advantage of any negotiating positions that you can get. That said, I would also say be very cautious of the North Korean leadership and the promises that they make. They have been notoriously unreliable over the decades, backing off on their promises and pledges. That said, the United States is actually guilty of doing some of that as well. The agreed framework agreement collapsed in part because the United States did not deliver on time the light water reactors that they had promised Pyongyang and the food aid. But going back to Sung's point about there having been peace on the Korean Peninsula since 1953, I would disagree with that. There's been an armistice, but there was no official peace treaty. And there have been a lot of cross-border skirmishes. Let's not forget the 2010 sinking of the Cheonan. This is a big deal. You've had artillery strikes across the border from North Korea on South Korean property. So I think that's a little bit of a strong term. But beyond the Moon Jae-in meeting and how I would advise him, I think the real question is how Trump is going to handle his meeting with Kim Jong-un.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Rex Tillerson was just fired. He was just fired weeks ago. And this is the man whose job it is to inform Donald Trump ahead of this meeting and advise him on how it's supposed to go. And he replaced him with Mike Pompeo, and he is about to hire John Bolton.
Right,
so I'm
John
not
Bolton,
very optimistic about that.
So let me take John Bolton and ask a final question to both Sung-Yoon Lee and Victor Gao. Let me start with Victor Gao. John Bolton, as Trump's national security advisor, is he the wrong hawk at the wrong time, or is he someone who could make a difference? Victor Gao, from the Chinese perspective first, before we go to Medford, Massachusetts. Victor Gao.
John Bolton is very much disliked in many parts of the world, and his position on threatening to use force should put him in a very dangerous position. He probably is a threat to global peace and stability, and I hope he will not mislead the United States in the wrong direction. I sincerely believe the American people also want to have peace and development. They do not want to see their own brothers and sisters' lives lost on the Korean Peninsula again.
Okay, Sung-Yoon Lee, John Bolton, is he going to make things more difficult when it comes to trying to find a solution to this problem?
More than John Bolton, Kim Jong-un is the real threat to peace and security in the region and in the world. Bolton has a character issue. He tends to go berserk, freak out, lose his temper, which is not helpful. But when you compare Bolton's argument that preemptive strike is a rational, perhaps even an effective option to, let's say, Ash Carter or Bill Perry, former Secretary of Defense, both of them, they co-authored in the Washington Post in July 2006 an op-ed calling for a preemptive strike against North Korea. I think the change in the dynamics today and protracted negotiations and the rubric of diplomacy and illusion of peace will make it exceedingly difficult for Bolton or Trump to even talk about, let alone implement any kind of preemptive strike. And that is a good thing in the short term, but the problem will fester and the North Korean threat will grow bigger and bigger.
Gentlemen, I've enjoyed talking to all of you. We're out of time, but thank you very much for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Sung-Yoon Lee, Will Satran and Victor Gao. Come back soon. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi knows the political power of social media and technology. He's had a Twitter account for 10 years and he has more than 40 million followers. And he's got a personal app to help drive engagement with his supporters. But that app is now at the center of a scandal over data and privacy. And Modi is being accused of spying on citizens. Take a look.
here in Hacker Square and in our community watching us live. And
Well, joining me now from New Delhi is Pavan Dugal. He's the chairman of the International Commission on Cybersecurity Law and an advocate at the Supreme Court of India. Also in New Delhi is Madhu Kishwar. She's an academic and writer and the founder of the human rights organization Manushi. I thank you both for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Pavan Dugal, let me begin with you. Let me ask it in the most direct way possible. Is India's government mining the private information, the private data of its citizens?
Currently, the Indian government does not appear to be mining the private data of its citizens. What's currently in the heart of all the news is this app by the Prime Minister. It's a personal app called the Namo app, which is linked to the website narendramodi.in. Now that is a personal app, that's not a governmental app. So there are no traces or any proof that the government appears to be mining any information of its citizens, though of course this particular app has been known to ask for a variety of as much as 22 different permissions from its users, including accessing to the videos, the photographs and other information. So I think all that's coming up because India lacks any dedicated legislation either on privacy or on data protection or on cyber security.
Right, so Madhu Kishwar, we have, I guess, unwitting users of an app giving up more information than they think they agreed to, and it's all going to a third party in the United States called CleverTap. That's not good, is it?
You know, this whole business of privacy actually appears rather ridiculous to me because they've made worse charges. Forget this Namo app. Much before this, they made worse charges. And they even took the matter to Supreme Court on the issue of Aadhaar, which is a multi-purpose identity card that has become sort of mandatory for every citizen. Now, Aadhaar card does not ask for any more information, in fact, much less information than I have to give if I want a visa to travel to US or when I have to apply for a passport. And yet they're making an issue of privacy. Now, I just don't understand. It's not as if Narendra Modi, through his app, is saying, tell me whether you are having extramarital affairs, who did you sleep with last night, how much money you have in your bank account, and how do you intend to invest it. None of that. It's also optional. It's like when I join Facebook, or I buy a mobile phone, I know very well that my life now from henceforth will not be under my control. So much of information about me is going to be available to multiple agencies who they use information, you know, I mean, just this mobile phone.
Okay.
When I travel, it keeps track of where I stop over for a cup of tea, where I fill gas in my car on a highway.
So it sounds as if you've but it sounds as if you've surrendered philosophically, at least, to the idea that you don't have any more privacy if you have a Facebook account, if you have a smartphone, and so forth.
No, it's not a case of surrendering. In my case, I live such an open and transparent life that honestly I don't care, except that I don't want somebody peeking into my bathroom when I'm bathing or when I'm sleeping and watch what I'm wearing at night when I go to bed. Other than that, my life is an open book.
So Pavan, so let's get a response from Pavan. Pavan, why are you making such a big deal of this and the issue of privacy if, as Madhu says, it's not a big deal?
Well, I think the fact remains is that Indians have an expectation of privacy, and the very fact that any app asks you access to your entire photographs and videos itself is an indication of the fact that a lot of your private information could be potentially accessed. The fact of the matter is that in India, we are beginning to see an evolution. In the last few months, we had the Supreme Court declaring that the right to privacy is a part of your fundamental right to life under the Indian Constitution. However, with the absence of any supporting mechanism, people are all looking up to what the government would be doing. But if an app which belongs to as high a person like the Prime Minister is collecting a lot of information, that's suddenly got the attention of a large number of stakeholders.
Right. So, Madhu, when we saw what happened in the aftermath of the scandal, there were updated guidelines that now say that the user's email, name, mobile phone number, device information, location, and all of that could be processed by third-party services. So they added that in now, right? Isn't that an admission that they should have had it in there in the first place?
Point that I'm trying to make is this. Even when I download an app for shopping, say on Amazon, or download an app for XYZ, believe you me, one of the reasons I avoid downloading too many apps is because they all demand access to photographs, to this, that, and the other. They all demand access to my contacts. Now, either I say, so what? My contacts are public knowledge. There's nothing secret about it. Or I say, I'm sorry, I won't. And it's not as if it's mandatory to download the Namo app. I haven't, and I will never do it because I'm not in the business of chasing prime ministers and their doings or wanting this kind of special. So if you are concerned about your privacy, then learn to act more privately. People are posting their honeymoon photographs, their girlfriend photographs, their sex life photographs on Facebook. And yet screaming privacy. I don't do that. In fact, one of the reasons I don't go to Facebook is because the moment I open my page, I see people posting their doggies, their little kids, doing little tricks with their pets, or their honeymoon and their girlfriends, and the last time they ate a pizza, and I see their favorite foods. I'm not interested.
Right.
And so I even avoid actually taking a peek into other people's lives, leave alone gratuitously other people peeks into my life.
Pavan, is that the answer? Rather than changing legislation, rather than tightening restrictions on the creators of the apps or the third parties, whoever wants to use it for analytics or whatever they want to use that information for, rather than that, it's about individuals sharpening their own minds and their own behavior to the fact that, hey, we live in a Black Mirror sort of scenario, so be careful, don't be naive, don't expect not to be surveilled in some way.
Well, in today's scenario, when India is undergoing a new revolution, which I call as the Great Indian Vomiting Revolution, where Indians are vomiting all kinds of information, personal, professional, and social, on the internet, I think it's high time for us to understand that no one strategy will work alone. A large number of strategies will have to work in conjunction with each other. So while strengthening of the laws is distinctly an important priority, having in place an adequate legal framework to regulate mobile apps and mobile service providers is another option. Yet another option is to re-look at this entire issue of intermediary liability. But while law can actually do only so much, it's far more important to create far more sensitization and capacity building, as also awareness amongst all Indian users. Now, Indians have been plunging into the social media ocean without having any kind of a training of what they need to be doing in order to protect their life skills and also their life secrets and other relevant personal information.
Okay, well, Pavan Dugal and Madhu Keshwar, it's been a pleasure talking to both of you. Thank you very much for joining us.
I still can't believe that this is actually happening. ये सच है. मैंने पिछले 5 सालों में हमेशा से यही ख्वाब देखा है कि मैं अपनी मुल्क में कदम रख सकूं. और जब आज देख रही हूँ तो बहुत खुश हूँ.
आज मुझे यकीनन बहुत खुशी है कि हमारी एक बच्ची जिसने दुनिया में बेपनाह शोहरत हासिल की वो अपने घर वापस आई।
Well, that's all for this edition of The Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. You can check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook and Twitter. Remember to like, follow and subscribe. Until next time, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.